Last week, I published a book on how to restore democracy in France, and my timing was perfect. Emmanuel Macron sacked his prime minister, reshuffled the cabinet, and appointed a new, very young prime minister. And all the time we were writing the book, France was actually a very calm and peaceful place. And I began to think, I've got the wrong subject. And then France erupted into riots. And in the book, I lecture the French on how good Irish democracy is. And once I finished the book, Ireland erupted into riots. So there's two takeaways. One is I'm very bad at forecasting. The other, more seriously, is that the world is mired in a democratic recession. Only 14% of the world's population live in what we call full democracies. The Economist Intelligence Unit, Freedom House measure the quality of democracies across the world, and they tell us that the level of democracy is the weakest it has been since 2005. And people are losing faith in democracy. In two of the traditional pillars of democracy, the US and the UK, we've seen the rule of law and democracy vandalized by populists over the last 7 or 8 years. And in countries as diverse as Argentina, India, Syria, and far too many countries in Africa, the idea of autocracy or the strong man is beginning to take hold. And this is deeply worrying at a time when so many people around the world are going to vote. So my message today is that we have to stand up and fight for democracy. We have to care for it, and we have to restore it. Democracy is not some doormat on which populists can wipe their feet. It's not an object to be vandalized by populists. And to my French friends, it doesn't always need a revolution to make it better. We can rethink and restore democracy. And actually, my biggest worry is that people do nothing. My biggest worry is that people in Europe, in the States, in many of the fast emerging countries in the world, that they're complacent. They do nothing to rebut attacks on democracy. They don't think about how to repurpose it for the 21st century. And I think we have to continually remind ourselves why we like democracy. The happiest countries in the world are democracies. The strongest economies, the most innovative regions and countries in the world are all democracies. And the opposite is largely true for autocracies and non-democracies. I wouldn't want to live in any of them. And I want to propose 3 ideas or 3 things to help restore democracy. One is that we push our governments to defend democracy. The other is we make it more social and more local. And the third one is that we realize that our economic model and the way we live economically will impact the quality of our democracy. So let's start with our governments. Most democratic governments are made up of nice, well-meaning, well-educated people who are far too often mugged and harangued by the enemies of democracy, and that has to stop. If you look at Europe, Hungary and Serbia, an EU member and prospective member, align themselves with Russia. They undermine the rule of law and democracy in Europe, and they have to be forced to choose sides. They have to be sanctioned, they have to lose their voting rights, they have to lose their funding. And if we talk about Russia, it's well known that Russia and other large countries are interfering in our democracies, not just in Europe, but in the States and many other parts of the world. And we have to push back on that, target their satellite states. Belarus, for example, is a country where people really want a political change, where they really want democracy. Some of you will remember that in the last days of communism, advocates of democracy smuggled photocopiers into Eastern Europe so people could enjoy literature and could read about political thought. And while the age of photocopiers is beyond us. That's the kind of mischievous innovation we need to see more of. Sticking with technology, governments need to work very forcefully and very closely with social media companies to stop the flow of disinformation into our political systems, and in particular to stop it poisoning the minds of young people as they all begin to vote for the first time. And like many other areas, climate change, economics, sports, we need to have clear benchmarks and standards to gauge our democracy. And for me, the simplest, most straightforward, and maybe most meaningful standard is how democracy treats women. And there the news is not good. Politics is becoming a no-go zone for women. And there's lots of evidence to prove this. Academics at Brown University in the States and Milan show that when women enter politics, they're 3 to 4 times more likely than males to be abused, to be harassed. And that harassment is due to gender, not the policies these women bring. And many of them leave politics. Another example is recently the first female finance minister of the Netherlands, Sigrid Kaag, left public life because of the viciousness and the vitriol of the abuse that she and her family were getting. Lots of surveys show that female MPs in Westminster feel the same. Sadly, it's probably true of female TDs in the Dáil and members of the Assembly here. So we as citizens and governments have to stop this and change this. We need more leadership by male politicians. We need severe sanctions on people who abuse people in public life. In France, there has been a sharp increase in physical attacks on politicians at the local and the national level. And we need to dial back the punishing intensity of public life so that everyday people can actually play a role in public life in whatever way they see fit. And this brings me to my second point, which is to make democracy more social and more local. Winston Churchill is reputed to have said that the best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. Well, if I look at all the potential voters here, I'm sure the last thing you want is a 5-minute conversation with your politicians if you can find them. And I think one of the problems we see across the world is that there's a gulf in trust between politicians and the public, and we have to repair this. One way of repairing it is to give more power back to people. And a mechanism that people talk more and more about is the idea of a citizens' assembly. It's worked very well in the South, where a number of citizens' assemblies have revolutionized Irish society. But when I make the example to my French friends, they say, well, we've tried it, it didn't work. They had a citizens' assembly in France on climate change. None of the recommendations were taken on board by the government because you have this disdain and distrust of the French elite for the people. So the solution, in fact, is to repurpose these innovations and to have it at the regional or departmental level where people actually can play a powerful role in local politics, local economies, without necessarily threatening their national politicians. And this, just a step, I've been lauding Irish democracy for the last 10 minutes, and as you know, I'm not a good forecaster, so I should probably stop. But there is one challenge I think we are skipping, and that's the debate on the possibility of a united Ireland. And for me, there's a really big gap in the debate here, in that there are so few people who are willing to use this debate as an opportunity to rethink governance and democracy in Ireland, in all of Ireland. For example, how to make local democracy in Munster even better like that in Ulster, and have the two of them work together, or how to make local government and local planning in many of our small towns, from Tralee to Dungannon, even better. So that's one of the big challenges that we have ahead of us. And then finally, just a step away from the local to the global, because I want to try to tie democracy into the sense of disorder in the world. And that's something, sadly, we probably all agree on, be it in politics, geopolitics, our economies, mental health, the impact of AI and mobile phones and the way we socialize, the impact of new science on our diet. The world is in flux, and that is troubling for many people. And many of these trends can be tied to the same causes. For example, economic crises tend to breed democratic crises. Extreme levels of inequality breed extreme levels of anger, which are then taken out on the democratic system. So we need to be mindful that the economic models we set up will impact our public life, and there is much we can do. 3 suggestions that I believe in are countries in the old developed world, or it can be new populous countries from Ethiopia to Nigeria to Bangladesh, is to build very good quality public goods, good education systems, healthcare systems, transport systems. That will produce educated voters who have less stress, fewer risks in their lives, and who have an attachment to the state. Another lesson from old countries to the new world is to have less financialized, less speculative, less indebted economies. You'll have less inequality, fewer economic crises, and better quality, more stable economic growth. And then there's much governments can do with tax systems. Why not, for example, have those who have jobs and roles that contribute to our society and to our democracy pay lower taxes than those who don't? There's no shortage of ideas, folks. What we have so far is a shortage of will and a shortage of urgency. And I want to end on that note of urgency, because it is palpable that the world in which many of us grew up in, the world that started with the fall of communism, that saw the spread of democracy across much of the world, that was marked by the triumph of the Good Friday Agreement, that saw billions of people raised out of poverty, that world, that regime is now over. And we're now into something else, the what's next. And we don't know what that what's next is. And people are coming up with words for it. The Germans call it the Zeitenwende. An old, interesting English word is the interregnum. So we're in that period in between. And all I am saying is that as we go towards what's next, we have the choice to build it on the bedrock of a stable democracy. Thank you.